Tara Farz was only 22 when the world decided she had lived too freely. Beautiful, fearless, and impossible to ignore, she built a life millions admired. But someone, somewhere, was watching her for a very different reason. A white Porsche, a quiet street in Baghdad. 3 shots. No warning. No escape. Hello, welcome to Dark Mind Files, your ultimate destination for deep, disturbing, and real crime stories. Tonight's story is not just about fame or beauty. It's about the price of standing out in a world that demands silence. If you like our work, please like this video, share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe our channel. This is the haunting story of Tara Farz, a life lived in the spotlight and a death hidden in the shadows. Baghdad was a city that never truly slept, even when the streets fell quiet. It carried a constant tension in the air, a mix of history, struggle, and unspoken rules that shaped how people lived their lives. In this city, standing out was never simple, and being different often came with consequences. But Tara Farz never tried to blend in. From a young age, she understood that the life she wanted would not fit into the narrow expectations placed around her. At just 22, she had already built a world that felt larger than the one around her. Her presence online was impossible to ignore. Bright images, confident poses, and a sense of freedom that many people admired filled her social media pages. She wore what she wanted, went where she wanted, and shared moments of her life without hesitation. Her followers grew quickly, turning her into a well-known face not just in her city, but far beyond it. To many, Tara represented something new. She was part of a generation that believed in visibility, in expression, in choosing one's own path. Young women saw her as proof that it was possible to step outside the limits they had always known. Brands noticed her influence and began offering her opportunities that brought both money and recognition. Her life seemed to move faster with each passing day, pulling her further into a spotlight that never dimmed. But attention in Baghdad was never simple. Every image she posted carried weight. Every decision she made was watched, judged, and discussed. For every person who admired her confidence, there was another who questioned it. For every supporter, there was a critic who believed she had gone too far. The same posts that brought her fame also brought scrutiny. The city observed her quietly at first, then more closely, then constantly. There were people who followed her not out of admiration, but out of curiosity that slowly turned into something else. Her lifestyle, her independence, and her refusal to hide became topics of conversation in places she would never see. Screens lit up with her photos, not always for the reasons she imagined. Her name began to carry different meanings depending on who spoke it. Still, Tara continued forward as if none of it could reach her. Confidence became her shield. She moved through the city in her white Porsche, a symbol of the life she had created for herself. The car turned heads wherever it went, just like she did. It was more than just a vehicle. It was a statement. It said she had made it, that she was in control, that she was not afraid. But control can be an illusion, especially in a place where invisible lines are drawn around people's lives. Tara believed she understood those lines well enough to avoid crossing them too far. She believed that success gave her protection, that being admired by so many would somehow outweigh the voices that disapproved. What she didn't see was how those voices were changing. They were becoming quieter, but more focused, less visible, but more dangerous. The kind of attention that doesn't show itself openly, but waits, watches, and learns. Somewhere beyond the glow of her screen and the admiration of her followers, a different story was beginning to form. One that didn't celebrate her freedom, but resented it. One that didn't see her as inspiring, but as a problem that needed to be solved. And while Tara continued to live her life in the light, that story was slowly growing in the dark, moving closer with every passing day. As Tara's fame continued to grow, the attention around her began to change in ways that were difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. At first, it had all seemed normal. More followers, more messages, more eyes watching her every move. It was the kind of attention that came with success. But slowly, something darker started to settle beneath the surface. The messages became more frequent, and their tone shifted. What once felt like distant noise began to feel direct, almost targeted. Hidden accounts appeared again and again, disappearing and returning under different names. They followed her posts closely, reacting within seconds, noticing details most people would overlook. They knew the locations she visited, the time she went out, the routine she followed. It felt less like admiration and more like surveillance. Photos that Tara shared casually started to take on a different meaning in the hands of strangers. Every image became something to analyze. The background of a picture, the reflection in a window, the street sign in the distance. Nothing went unnoticed. It was as if people were piecing together a map of her life without her permission. Outside the digital world, the feeling followed her. There were moments that seemed small at first. A car parked near her home longer than usual. A figure standing across the street, not moving, not looking away. A motorcycle passing by slowly, then returning again minutes later. None of it was enough to prove anything. None of it could be clearly explained. But together, it created a quiet sense that something wasn't right. The city began to feel different. Streets she had driven through countless times now carried a strange weight. Familiar places felt unfamiliar. Even the air seemed heavier, as if it carried a warning she couldn't fully understand. Tara tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just part of being visible, part of living a life that so many people could see. Fear had no place in the world she had built. Confidence had always been her strength, and she refused to let it fade. But the patterns continued. There were times when her plans seemed to be known before she shared them. Places she visited quietly would suddenly feel crowded with unfamiliar faces. It was as if someone, or something, was always one step ahead. Watching, learning, waiting. The idea that it could be random no longer made sense. Somewhere in the background of her life, there was a presence that didn't belong. It didn't show itself openly, but it made itself known in small, calculated ways. It created a pressure that slowly built over time, tightening around her routine without ever fully revealing its source. Tara remained in motion, continuing her work, her posts, her public life. On the surface, nothing had changed. Her images were still bright, her expressions still confident. The world still saw her as fearless. But beneath that image, something had shifted. There was a growing awareness that she was no longer just being watched by an audience. This was something else, something more focused, more deliberate. And while she moved forward, refusing to step back, whatever was watching her continued to move closer, quietly closing the distance. By the time the danger became real, it was already too late to escape it. September 27, 2018, arrived like any other day in Baghdad, heavy with heat and wrapped in a quiet tension that never fully left the city. The morning passed slowly, the sun climbing higher, pressing down on the streets until everything seemed to move at a slower pace. Dust lingered in the air, softening the outlines of buildings and blurring the distance. It was the kind of day where nothing seemed out of place, and yet something felt slightly off, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Tara Farz moved through her day with the same rhythm she had grown used to. Her routine gave her a sense of control, a way to stay grounded in a life that had become increasingly unpredictable. By the afternoon, she found herself behind the wheel of her white Porsche, the familiar interior offering a brief sense of comfort. The engine started smoothly, its quiet power contrasting with the noise of the streets outside. As she drove into the Kamsara district, the environment began to shift. The roads narrowed, buildings pressed closer together, and the usual movement of the city seemed to thin out. There were fewer cars, fewer people, and a silence that didn't feel natural. It was the kind of silence that made small sounds stand out. The low hum of the engine, the faint crunch of tires against dust, the distant echo of something hard to place. The car moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if responding to the unease that hung in the air. Tara's hands remained steady on the wheel, her focus fixed on the road ahead. Nothing visible suggested danger, yet the feeling lingered, quiet but persistent. Then, in a moment so brief it barely registered, a motorcycle entered her path. It appeared from behind, moving quickly but with purpose. Its presence felt sudden, but not random. It closed the distance with alarming precision, coming up alongside the car in a way that left no space to react. There was no warning, no signal, no time to understand what was happening. The first shot broke the silence like a crack through glass. Then the second, then the third. Each sound was sharp, controlled, and final. The noise echoed against the walls of the narrow street, disappearing almost as quickly as it came. The impact was immediate. The car jolted, its forward motion interrupted as control slipped away in an instant. The Porsche rolled ahead a short distance before coming to a slow, unnatural stop. The engine continued to run, its low hum now the only sound left in the space. The stillness that followed felt heavier than before, as if the entire street had frozen in place. The motorcycle did not hesitate. It moved away just as quickly as it had arrived, disappearing into the maze of streets without leaving a trace behind. No one stepped forward. No one intervened. The moment passed as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of what had just occurred. Inside the car, everything had changed. What had been an ordinary drive had turned into something irreversible in a matter of seconds. There had been no chance to escape, no opportunity to react, no way to alter the outcome. The precision of the attack made it clear that this was not random. It was planned, calculated, and executed with a cold certainty. The street slowly returned to motion, but nothing felt the same. The quiet that settled afterward carried a different weight, one that lingered long after the moment had passed. And just like that, the life Tara Farz had built, bright, visible, and full of movement, was brought to a sudden and silent end, leaving behind a city that would struggle to understand what had truly happened. The news did not take long to spread. Within hours, images of the white Porsche and the narrow street began circulating across social media. The same platforms that had once amplified Tara's life now carried the weight of her death. Her final moments were replayed again and again, analyzed from every angle, shared by millions who struggled to understand how something so sudden could happen in broad daylight. The reaction was immediate and divided. Many expressed shock, grief, and anger. Others responded with quiet judgment, framing the tragedy in ways that shifted attention away from the violence itself. The city became filled with opinions, each one shaping a different version of who Tara had been and why her life had ended. Authorities moved quickly to open an investigation. The street where it happened was sealed off, and every detail was examined. Surveillance footage became the center of attention. Cameras from nearby buildings captured fragments of the event, the approach of the motorcycle, its position beside the car, and its disappearance seconds later. The images were clear enough to confirm how carefully the attack had been carried out, but not clear enough to reveal the identity of the person behind it. The more investigators studied the footage, the more it pointed to planning rather than chance. The timing was exact. The location was controlled. The execution left no room for error. This was not an act of impulse. It was something that had been prepared in advance. As the investigation expanded, different possibilities began to emerge. One theory suggested that the attack was part of a larger pattern. In recent months, other women with public visibility had faced threats, harassment, and, in some cases, violence. These incidents shared a common thread. Each involved individuals who lived openly, who challenged expectations, and who refused to remain invisible. The idea that Tara's death could be connected to a wider campaign began to take hold. Time moved forward, but the case did not move with it. In the days that followed, there was urgency, pressure, and constant attention. But as weeks turned into months, that urgency began to fade. The headlines became smaller. The updates became less frequent. What had once felt like a story demanding answers slowly turned into one surrounded by silence. There were moments when it seemed like a breakthrough was close. Reports surfaced of a suspect being identified, someone who may have had a connection to the planning behind the attack. The details, however, were never fully confirmed. Information appeared briefly, then disappeared just as quickly. Each possible lead brought a sense of hope, only to collapse before it could form a complete picture. Behind the scenes, it was believed that the case had reached places far beyond a simple investigation. The idea that powerful connections might be involved began to circulate quietly, not in official statements, but in the spaces between them. It suggested that the truth, whatever it was, had become difficult to reveal, not because it could not be found, but because it could not be exposed. For many, this explanation felt as unsettling as the crime itself. The possibility that justice could be delayed, or even denied, added another layer to the story. It shifted the focus from a single act of violence to a system that might allow such an act to remain unanswered. The questions were no longer just about who carried out the attack, but about who allowed it to remain hidden. At the same time, the meaning of Tara Farz's life began to change in the public eye. Her social media accounts remained untouched, frozen in a moment that no longer existed. The images still showed confidence, freedom, and a life filled with movement. But now, those same images carried a different weight. They became reminders of how quickly everything could be taken away. People continued to visit her profiles, scrolling through memories of a person they felt they knew, even if they had never met her. Some saw her as a symbol of courage, someone who had chosen to live freely despite the risks. Others continued to view her through a lens of criticism, unable to separate her choices from her fate. This divide never fully disappeared. In quiet conversations, another idea began to take shape. It was not as loud as the public debates, but it carried a deeper impact. It suggested that Tara's story was not just about one person, but about many. About those who lived visibly in places that demanded silence. About the cost of standing out in a world that resisted change. The lack of clear answers left space for interpretation, and that space was filled in different ways by different people. Some believed the truth was known but protected. Others believed it had been lost entirely, buried under layers of fear and influence. What remained undeniable was the precision of the moment that ended her life. It had been planned, executed, and completed without interruption. That level of certainty pointed to intention, not chance. It meant that somewhere, someone had made a decision, and that decision had been carried out exactly as intended. In the end, the case did not close in the way people expected. There was no single explanation that brought everything together, no final answer that settled every question. Instead, there was only a collection of possibilities, each one incomplete on its own. Tara Farz became a name that carried more than just a story. It carried a warning, a question, and a reflection of a reality that many preferred not to face. And long after the street in Kamsara returned to its normal rhythm, the shadow of what happened there remained, quiet but permanent, reminding anyone who looked closely that some stories do not end with truth, they end with silence. Some stories leave behind answers. Others leave behind silence. This was one of them. A life watched by millions and ended by someone who never wanted to be seen. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel for more gripping videos.